The planet Carthos IV was a silent wasteland. Storms of red dust swept over broken metal, old battle tanks, and the remains of war. No birds sang, no machines moved, and no life was supposed to survive there. But far from the crashed battle lines, in a hollow near the ridges, a small fire burned. A man sat beside it, wrapped in torn survival cloth, his face marked by sun and sand. His name was Commander Jacob Hale, a human engineer who had once served in the Frontier Repair Corps. He had been left behind months ago when his ship was destroyed during the final retreat. His rescue signal had gone unanswered and food was running out. Yet somehow he refused to give up. Every day he repaired what little he had. A broken generator, a half-melted drone, an oxygen tank he patched a dozen times. He talked to himself sometimes just to keep his voice alive. The stars above reminded him of home, though he had almost forgotten what home smelled like. One morning, while collecting parts from the wreckage of an old satellite, Jacob saw smoke on the horizon. At first he thought it was another storm, but the black trail moved wrong. It was too sharp, too sudden. He dropped the metal piece he was carrying and ran to his shelter. From a hilltop he saw a ship breaking through the clouds, spinning out of control. It was a small diplomatic shuttle, silver and blue, its wings burning. Within seconds it smashed into the rocky plain with a thunder that shook the ground. Jacob grabbed his emergency kit and sprinted toward the crash. Dust whipped against his face as he climbed over metal fragments still hot from the fall. The air smelled of fuel and ozone. When he reached the cracked hull, he shouted, "Is anyone alive in there?" There was no answer, only the hiss of cooling metal. He used a crowbar to pry open a side door. Inside, the cabin was filled with smoke and flashing warning lights. He could barely see, but he heard a faint sound, a soft gasp. He pushed through fallen cables and saw her. A tall figure in a silver-blue uniform lay pinned under a beam. Her skin was a deep shade of pale blue, smooth like water, glowing faintly even in the darkness. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Jacob froze for a moment, surprised she was not human. He recognized the species at once. An envoy from the Nerethi Dominion, one of the peace factions. He didn't have time to think. He forced the beam aside with all his strength and checked her pulse. It was weak, but there. Her breathing mask was shattered, and her oxygen levels were dropping. Jacob tore open his own gear, removing his air tank and connecting it to hers with a piece of tubing he built on the spot. The pressure wasn't perfect, but it kept air flowing. He whispered, "Hang on. You're going to make it." The shuttle was unstable. Fire licked the side panels and the floor trembled. He knew he had minutes before the power cells exploded. Lifting her carefully, he carried her through the smoke, step by step, until they were outside in the open wind. He laid her down on the sand and checked again. Her pulse had strengthened slightly. Jacob sat beside her, coughing, his hands shaking. He had done this hundreds of times for his crew in the war, but never for someone like her. Hours passed as the storm built again. He dragged her body toward his cave shelter half a kilometer away. Each gust of wind cut through his clothes, each grain of sand burned his skin. He refused to stop. When he finally reached his shelter, he placed her near the small generator that gave off faint warmth. Her breathing steadied. He used his ration water to clean the wounds on her face and arms, then wrapped her in his only thermal blanket. Night fell. The storm howled outside, shaking the walls of his small cave. Jacob sat beside the alien woman, adjusting the oxygen valve every few minutes. He spoke softly, though she could not hear. "You're safe now. Don't worry about who I am." He smiled tiredly, the first time in days. Something about saving her gave him a strange peace, a reason to keep moving. When morning came, her eyes fluttered open for the first time. They were bright silver, clear and full of confusion. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her throat was too dry. Jacob quickly handed her a canteen and said, "Easy, just sip." She looked at him as if trying to understand. Her lips moved slowly. "You human?" Her translator chip sparked weakly, distorting her voice. He nodded. "Yes, you crashed. I found you." She looked around the cave, then at him again, her expression uncertain. She tried to stand but fell back with pain. He caught her gently before she hit the ground. "Don't move. You're injured. Stay still." For a few seconds their eyes met. His brown and tired, hers metallic and glowing faintly. In that moment something unspoken passed between them. A fragile link between two survivors who were supposed to be enemies once. Jacob worked for the next 2 days repairing her communicator. using pieces of his broken drone and the shuttle's wreckage. He didn't understand her language well, but he tried to make gestures showing her food, water, warmth. Slowly she began to trust him. She watched as he fixed a solar plate outside and brought light into the cave. "You repair everything," she said quietly through her recovering translator. He shrugged. "It's what I do."
Keeps me alive. On the third night, she told him her name, Lyra Venz, envoy to the Galactic Council, sent to negotiate peace.
She had been on her way to the border when pirates attacked her shuttle. She remembered nothing after the explosion. When she spoke, her voice carried sadness and dignity. "If I die here, the peace may die too," she whispered. Jacob shook his head firmly. "You're not dying. Not while I'm breathing." Her eyes softened. "Why help me?" "Humans and Nerethi. We were enemies." Jacob looked at the small fire. "War ends when someone decides to stop fighting. I saw enough killing. I'm done with it." He paused. "Maybe this is my way to make something right." That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She watched the human working silently, adjusting power cells, checking her oxygen, preparing a flare beacon from spare parts. She realized how thin and fragile he looked, yet how determined his movements were. He never complained, never asked for thanks. He just worked. In her world, such selflessness was rare. 2 days later, a rescue drone flew over the wasteland. Jacob saw its distant flash and lit his beacon. Within hours, a larger vessel descended through the storm clouds. Lyra turned to him, panic and relief mixed in her eyes. "They found us," she said. He nodded, smiling faintly. "Good, you'll be safe now." She reached for his arm. "Come with me." "You can't stay here," but Jacob shook his head. "My ID beacon is damaged. To them, I'm listed missing in action. They'll think I died. Maybe that's better. I'll wait for another pickup." She wanted to argue, but the rescue team was already approaching. Soldiers in silver armor rushed in, speaking in Nerethi tongue. They lifted her onto a stretcher. She tried to look back at Jacob, but the medic closed the hatch. The last thing she saw before the doors sealed was him standing outside in the storm, his torn uniform flapping, his eyes calm. He gave a small nod, the kind that said everything words could not. When she woke again, she was in a medical bay orbiting Carthos IV. The doctor told her she had been found next to wreckage. Her oxygen line repaired with human engineering, but no human was recovered. Lyra stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy. "There was a man," she said softly. The doctor hesitated. "No records of any human presence, Ambassador." She closed her eyes, feeling tears she couldn't explain. "Then he's gone," she whispered. Somewhere far below, in the endless red dust, Jacob Hale watched the sky as the rescue ship faded into the clouds. He smiled despite the loneliness pressing against him. "Save her," he said quietly to himself. "That's enough." The wind answered with a hollow sound, carrying his words across the barren land. For him, that was the end. But for the galaxy, it was the beginning of a story that would one day shake every world to silence. Years passed since the crash on Carthos IV. The war between humans and the Nerethi Dominion had ended. The galaxy was still healing from its wounds, burned planets, broken fleets, and lost lives. Peace treaties were signed, but trust was still fragile. Many races still looked at humans with fear, unsure whether to see them as saviors or destroyers. Lyra Venz, the alien woman Jacob Hale had rescued, had recovered fully and risen to become one of the most respected diplomats in the Galactic Assembly. Her calm voice and soft manner made her a bridge between species. She worked tirelessly to repair the alliance, yet she never spoke publicly about the human who had saved her. The memory was too personal, too sacred. Sometimes at night, when she stood by the window of her quarters on Solus Prime, she would look up at the stars and whisper to herself, "He's still out there." She didn't even know why she believed it. The report said no human was found on Carthos IV. The black box from her shuttle recorded only her own weak signal. But she remembered the eyes of that man, the way he had refused to give up on her, the calm steadiness in his voice. Those memories were impossible to forget. The Galactic Assembly Hall was a grand place. Tall glass spires, floating banners, and hundreds of delegates from across the galaxy. Each week they gathered to discuss rebuilding trade routes, food distribution, and border defense. Lyra sat among them, quiet but observant. Many envoys still argued about whether humans should be allowed into the Central Council. Some feared human ambition, others admired their courage. One day, during a long session about border patrols, the communication screens at the front of the chamber flickered. A distorted voice came through the speakers. Low, rough, full of static. "This is Hale, requesting clearance from Solus Command." Coordinates attached. The hall went silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward the sound. The voice repeated clearer this time. "This is Commander Jacob Hale of the Terran Engineering Corps. Respond if anyone still remembers." Lyra froze. Her hand tightened around the edge of the desk. That voice. She could not mistake it. Her breath caught, her heart pounding like it had that night in the storm. She whispered his name without realizing. Jacob. Other delegates were murmuring now. "Impossible," said a Zarin officer. "That name is listed among the dead." A council guard confirmed. "Signal is from the old mining outpost on the rim. No human base has been active there in 10 years. Lyra stood slowly. "Request that the message be replayed." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. The recording played again, this time clearer. "This is Hale. I repeat, requesting clearance to transmit recovered data. For the record, I am alive." The sound filled the hall. Even the most talkative delegates said nothing. When it ended, the chamber remained utterly still. Lyra felt tears form in her eyes, but she blinked them away before anyone could notice. She turned toward the High Chairman. "We must respond. That man is a survivor. He may carry vital information." The chairman frowned. "Ambassador Venz, are you certain this is not a trick?" "Old war signals sometimes." "I know that voice," she interrupted softly. "He saved my life." A wave of whispers spread through the hall. Few knew that she owed her life to a human. Fewer still had imagined that man might still exist. Later that night, Lyra sat alone in her quarters, the message replaying over and over on her private console. She closed her eyes and listened, every pause, every breath. It was older, rougher, but it was him. She knew it beyond all doubt. The official investigation began the next day. Drones were sent to verify the coordinates. Reports returned quickly. There was indeed activity in that region. A small power field, life signs, and an ancient human transponder. It wasn't just an echo. Someone was really there. The assembly argued for days about what to do. Some wanted to ignore it, fearing a human trap. Others wanted to send soldiers. Lyra argued for a peaceful envoy. "If he has survived alone for this long, he is not our enemy," she said. "He may hold knowledge the entire galaxy has forgotten." At last, a small team was approved. 1 shuttle, no weapons, diplomatic mission only. Lyra volunteered to lead it. When asked why, she simply said, "Because I owe him more than my life." As the shuttle prepared to launch, old memories returned to her. The storm, the cave, the smell of smoke, his steady hands fixing her oxygen line. She touched the side of her ship as if it could carry her message through time. "Please still be alive," she whispered. The journey to the rim took 3 days. The stars outside the viewport stretched like lines of silver, and Lyra barely slept. The crew, a mix of humans and aliens, respected her silence. They knew she was searching for something personal, though none understood how deep that bond ran. When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace, they saw the mining outpost and a half-collapsed station orbiting a dying moon. Broken solar panels hung at odd angles and weak lights flickered across the surface. The scanners confirmed it, one life form, human. The pilot looked back. "Ma'am, do we proceed?" Lyra nodded. Land. The shuttle touched down on a cracked landing pad covered in frost. The air was thin, the light dim. As the doors opened, Lyra stepped out, her heart pounding. Her boots crunched on the old metal floor. The silence felt heavy, almost sacred. "Stay close," she told her guards. They moved through dark corridors lined with rust and dust. Old banners from the war hung torn on the walls. Then a voice came from the shadows. "You're not rescue," everyone froze. The voice was calm, dry, familiar. Out from behind a doorway stepped Jacob Hale. He looked older now, his beard grayer, his face lined by years of isolation. But his eyes were the same, deep and steady. He held no weapon, only a small data pad. "Guess I didn't imagine the signal reaching anyone," he said quietly. Lyra could barely breathe. "It really is you," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd remember." "How could I forget the man who saved my life?" she said softly. The guards glanced at each other, unsure if they should speak. The tension in the air was thick, but it wasn't hostility. It was something deeper, something like wonder. Jacob gestured toward a small room filled with salvaged equipment. "Come in, it's not much, but it's warm." The team followed cautiously. The room was cluttered with machines he had repaired over the years. Solar batteries, comm units, drones, and pieces of alien tech. It looked like a museum of survival. Lyra walked slowly, her eyes taking in every detail. "You lived here alone?" He nodded. "Since the war ended. Never got the recall order, never stopped fixing things. Figured someone would need the data I found." He placed the data pad on the table. Turns out the people who started that war weren't just military. Some of them were in the assembly. Her eyes widened. "You have proof?" He nodded again. "Enough to start another war, or end corruption forever." The guards exchanged nervous glances. Lyra looked back at Jacob. "Then we have to show it. The galaxy deserves to know." He hesitated. "I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone anymore." "You can trust me," she said firmly. He met her gaze for a long time, then smiled faintly. "I already did once." For the first time in years, Lyra felt something break open inside her. A rush of relief, sadness, and gratitude all at once. She realized he had never truly left her life. His voice had been with her all along, guiding her decisions, shaping her courage. As the shuttle prepared to leave, Jacob packed his things quietly. When the engines roared to life, Lyra turned to him and said, "The galaxy thought you were a ghost." He looked out the window at the stars. "Maybe I was. Guess I'm human again now." She smiled faintly. "Then let's bring you home." And for the first time since Carthos Fur, Jacob Hale stepped onto a ship not as a stranded man, but as someone who carried the truth and the hope of all humanity in his hands. The return to Solus Prime was quiet. The crew said little, and Jacob Hale spent most of the journey sitting near the window staring at the stars. After years of silence, the sight of other ships again felt almost unreal. The endless glow of space used to comfort him, but now it made him uneasy. He had been away from people for so long that their voices, their movements, even their laughter felt strange. Lyra often came to sit near him. She didn't speak much either. Sometimes she would just watch him fix a broken connector or check the data he carried. His hands moved with calm precision as if they had never forgotten the rhythm of repair. When he noticed her eyes on him, he smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard," he said. "You never stopped working," she replied softly. "Even when everyone thought you were dead," Jacob shrugged. "Didn't have much choice. Machines keep me busy. Quiet things don't argue." Her lips curved in a gentle smile. "Still, you could have given up." He looked at her and his expression grew serious. "I tried once, but every time I looked at the sky I remembered that crash. I couldn't let it be for nothing." "You had to live." Lyra's eyes lowered. The words hit her deeply. For years she had felt a shadow over her soul, the sense that she owed her second life to someone who had vanished. And now that person was sitting next to her, calm and alive. When the ship reached Solus Prime, the spaceport was already on alert. Dozens of ships orbited the planet and security forces stood ready. The signal of a dead human commander returning with unknown data had spread quickly across the assembly. Some wanted to welcome him, others wanted to arrest him. Humans were still outsiders in the core systems, tolerated but not trusted. The landing ramp opened slowly. Bright light spilled in, and a crowd of officers waited below. Lyra stepped out first, her diplomatic crest shining on her collar. Jacob followed, carrying a small metal case, the one that held the truth he had risked everything to protect. A tall security officer approached. "Commander Hale," he said stiffly, "by order of the Galactic Assembly, you are requested to surrender your data for examination." Jacob glanced at Lyra. She gave a slight nod. He handed over the case, saying calmly, "Handle it carefully. It carries more than numbers. It carries the weight of what people died for." The officer hesitated at his tone, then bowed slightly. "Understood." Within hours, the entire assembly had gathered for an emergency session. The hall shimmered with light from hundreds of floating screens. Delegates from dozens of species sat in curved rows around the center stage. Lyra and Jacob were escorted to the main platform. The room buzzed with whispers. A living human soldier standing beside an alien ambassador was a rare sight. The chairman began, his voice firm. "Commander Hale, We have verified that your data files are genuine. They include communications between war contractors and council members who secretly funded both sides of the last conflict. If true, this information could destabilize every major government in the galaxy. Jacob stood straight. Then it should. People deserve to know the truth. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Some delegates frowned, others nodded quietly. Lyra remained calm beside him, her silver eyes focused on the faces before her. A Zaran general rose from his seat. And what proof do we have that this human does not fabricate evidence to serve his own race? He demanded. Jacob's jaw tightened, but Lyra spoke before he could. Proof is in the details. He had nothing to gain by surviving alone for years. If he wanted power, he could have hidden this data or sold it to the highest bidder. But he didn't. He called for peace instead of vengeance. Her words silenced the general for a moment. Jacob then pressed a button on his wristpad, and holographic recordings filled the air. Secret messages, trade contracts, and meeting notes between high-ranking council members and private weapons guilds. The delegates gasped as their own symbols appeared in the projections. This, Jacob said quietly, is what I found in the debris fields. They built wars to fill their pockets. And while they sat safe in their towers, men and women, humans, Nerethi, Zaran, all of us, burned on the front lines. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of truth and sorrow. When the holograms faded, the room stayed completely silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Lyra looked around slowly. For years we called humanity dangerous, she said. But tell me, who among us had the courage to do what this man did? Who among us would live in exile just to bring light to our corruption? No one answered. Later, after the session ended, chaos filled the corridors outside. Some delegates wanted an immediate trial for those exposed. Others wanted the information buried. Reporters shouted questions as Jacob and Lyra walked toward the assembly gardens. Guards cleared a path, but Jacob ignored the noise. When they reached the quiet path lined with glowing trees, Lyra finally exhaled. You just changed everything. Jacob sat on a stone bench, weary but calm. I didn't plan to. I only wanted the truth to reach someone who cared. She looked at him for a long moment. You still don't understand what you've done. You gave hope to an entire galaxy. He shook his head. No, you did that. I just fixed what was broken. Her eyes softened. You really believe fixing broken things is enough? He smiled faintly. It's what humans do best. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the wind pass through the trees. The night sky above Solus Prime shimmered with city lights and starships moving like fireflies. Lyra finally spoke again. When I woke up in that cave years ago, I thought I was seeing a ghost. Now I see that I met the best of humanity. Jacob looked at her, unsure how to respond. Praise never sat comfortably with him. He had seen too many good people die to believe in heroes, Lyra. He said softly, I didn't save you to make history. I just couldn't let another life slip away. I know, she replied, and that's why your story will live longer than any battle report. The next day, the assembly called for a public address. Billions across the galaxy tuned in to watch the event. The council platform was filled with reporters, cameras, and security officers. Jacob stood beside Lyra again, his posture firm but humble. When the chairman asked who would speak first, Lyra stepped forward. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. She began not with politics or numbers, but with memory. There was a time, she said, when I believed humans were destroyers. I believed they burned everything they touched. Then one man proved me wrong. On a dead planet, he gave me his oxygen so that I might live. He asked for nothing in return. He didn't care what I was, alien, enemy, stranger. He only saw someone who needed help. The hall was silent. Cameras zoomed closer. Lyra continued, her tone soft but strong. I speak to you today not as an ambassador but as a witness. Humanity is not perfect, and none of us are. But if one human can choose compassion over hate, then maybe there is hope for every world in this assembly. Her words carried across every colony, every ship, every living being listening. People from countless species paused their work to watch. Some cried. Some stood in silence. Others whispered that they had never heard truth spoken so simply. When she finished, Lyra turned to Jacob. He stood motionless, his eyes lowered. He hadn't expected her to speak about him, but when she met his gaze, she saw gratitude and quiet pride. For a long time, the hall remained utterly still. Then slowly the delegates began to rise from their seats one by one in silent respect. Lyra's words had done what no weapon or treaty ever could. They united hearts, if only for a moment. And in that silence, Jacob Hale, the forgotten engineer, the stranded soldier, became the symbol of what humanity could be at its best. Humble, brave, and endlessly kind. That night, as the stars over Solus Prime burned bright, the galaxy felt just a little less divided. The next morning after the speech, Solus Prime woke to a silence the galaxy had never known before. The usual rush of transport ships paused. Even the assembly plaza felt still, as if the air itself held its breath. News screens across colonies replayed Lyra's words again and again. Children watched them in classrooms. Soldiers in far-off outposts stood motionless. Old veterans who had lost everything during the war wept quietly as they listened. For the first time in years, people didn't talk about borders or power. They talked about one man, the human who gave up his breath to save another life. Jacob Hale's name spread across the stars like a legend, though he never called himself a hero. Inside the assembly, chaos turned into transformation. Investigations began immediately. The leaders exposed by Jacob's data were arrested and removed from office. The entire system of war funding was dismantled. For the first time, the Galactic Council decided to include human representatives in its rebuilding council. It was a slow process, but it had started. And it started because one human engineer refused to stay silent. Jacob didn't attend most of the political meetings. He disliked speeches and ceremonies. He preferred the quiet of the maintenance decks where he repaired broken drones and cleaned old power lines. It made him feel useful. But wherever he went, people stopped to look at him with quiet respect. Children of different species saluted him. Soldiers nodded as he passed. Lyra often visited him there. She would bring tea from her homeworld and sit near the workbench while he fixed small machines. "You know," she said one day, watching sparks flicker from his tool, "they're naming a new alliance after your mission. The Hale Accord." Jacob looked up with surprise. "They don't need my name. It was your speech that changed everything." She smiled softly. "No, Jacob, I only gave them words." "You gave them reason," he shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do." Lyra looked at him with gentle eyes. "That's why it mattered. Because not everyone does." Days turned into weeks. The council began drafting new laws. Fair trade, joint exploration, and shared colonies between humans and other species. Peace felt fragile but possible. Reporters tried to interview Jacob, but he always refused. "I'm an engineer," he said. "Let the diplomats talk." Yet despite his silence, his story kept spreading. Music bands wrote songs about him. Artists painted murals of the storm on Carthosta 4, one showing a human bending over an alien body offering his air. Some even built statues of him and Lyra standing side by side. He disliked the attention, but Lyra would tease him, saying, "You can't stop people from remembering hope." One evening, Lyra found him alone at the assembly gardens again. The light from the twin moons reflected in the pond nearby. He sat quietly, watching the ripples move. She approached softly. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I'm not a councilman, Lyra. I was never meant for halls and speeches. There's a new frontier out there. Places that need rebuilding. Old worlds where the war hit hardest. I can help there." She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've already given enough. You could stay, live in peace." Jacob smiled faintly. "Peace isn't a place. It's what you build every day. If I stay still, I'll lose it." Her heart ached at his words. For years she had dreamed of finding him again, and now he was leaving. But she also understood him better than anyone else could. He was a man of motion. A soul meant to fix, heal, and move forward. "Then promise me one thing," she said quietly. "Don't vanish again." He chuckled softly. "I'll try. But you know me. I like quiet corners of the galaxy." She stepped closer and held out a small silver pendant. "Take this. It carries the mark of the Nerethi envoy. Wherever you go, this will remind anyone that you are a friend, not a stranger." Jacob took it gently. "Thank you. I'll keep it safe." For a long moment they stood together under the twin moons, two souls from worlds once divided, bound now by shared history. Neither spoke, but they didn't need to. The next morning his departure was simple. No grand farewell, no music, just a small shuttle lifting off from Dock 9 bound for the frontier worlds. Lyra watched from the observation deck as the ship rose into the orange sky and disappeared beyond the clouds. Weeks later, his reports began arriving, short, practical messages sent to the Council's archives. Rebuilt 2 power grids on Varnus 3. Restored clean water systems on Telora Outpost. Medical drones operational again. Nothing dramatic, just quiet work. But those simple reports inspired more volunteers than any speech could. Years passed. The galaxy changed slowly but steadily. The Hale Accord became the foundation for a new era of cooperation. Humans were no longer seen as dangerous outsiders but as equal partners. Mixed colonies flourished, and old soldiers finally put down their weapons. Lyra aged gracefully, her silver eyes still bright with wisdom. She never married, though many proposed. When asked why, she would smile softly and say, "My heart already found the one who taught me peace." On the 20th anniversary of the Hale Accord, the Council built a memorial park on Solus Prime. At the center stood a statue, not of soldiers or kings, but of a human holding out an oxygen mask to a fallen alien. The inscription beneath it read, "Compassion is stronger than war." During the ceremony, Lyra stood before the crowd. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to speak. "Many years ago, I was dying on a forgotten world. A human saved me. He had nothing, no army, no rank, not even hope of rescue. Yet he gave everything he had so I could live. I stand here today because of him, and because of him, we all stand here together." As her words echoed through the plaza, people from dozens of species bowed their heads. Some cried, some smiled, some simply closed their eyes in silence. After the event, Lyra walked to the memorial at night when the crowd had gone. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of new flowers. She touched the base of the statue gently and whispered, "You kept your promise, Jacob. You never vanished. You live in all of them now." Then as she turned to leave, her communicator beeped. It was an encrypted message, unsigned. She frowned and opened it. The screen flickered and a familiar voice came through, rougher, older but unmistakably his. "Ambassador Venz," it said. "Power grid restored on the edge colonies. People are rebuilding faster than expected. You'd like it here. Quiet skies, hard-working folks. They call it New Horizon. If you ever need repairs done, you know who to call." Lyra smiled, her eyes wet with tears. "Still fixing the galaxy, aren't you?" she whispered. The stars above shimmered like 1,000 silent answers. Jacob Hale continued to travel from world to world, never staying long, never taking credit. Wherever disaster struck, reports always mentioned a mysterious human engineer who arrived out of nowhere, repaired everything, and left before dawn. To the people, he became a legend, the man who never stopped saving. And across the galaxy, his story became a lesson told to children of every race, that courage is not born in power, but in kindness. That the smallest act of humanity can reshape the stars themselves. Many years later, when Lyra's time came to an end, she asked to be buried on Carthos 4, the place where her life had been saved. Her final message to the Council was short. "If anyone asks why I chose that world, tell them it's where I met the soul that reminded us what it means to be alive." When the message was read aloud, the entire assembly stood in silence once more. No one spoke for several minutes. The galaxies listened again, just as they had the first time she said his name. And somewhere far beyond the known stars, a small ship drifted quietly through space. Inside sat an old man with tired eyes and steady hands repairing a beacon that had stopped blinking. When it came back to life, its light spread through the darkness and waved a single spark against the endless void. Jacob smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Save her. That's enough." Then he looked at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, every light that shone carried a piece of what he'd left behind. The simple, unshakable truth that humanity at its best could change the galaxy not through power, but through heart.